Section 7 of the prologue may not be long compared to other sections, but as we will see, it is in no way unimportant. The first line reads, "Meanwhile evening came and the marketplace hid in darkness." I'm gonna interpret the word darkness metaphorically since Zarathustra has been left abandoned and alone. However, as we shall soon see, this state of darkness is not the whole story. As I mentioned, Zarathustra is all alone, and we are further told that night came at last and a cold wind blew over the lonely one. But for Nietzsche, the fact that Zarathustra is alone is not necessarily a negative thing. In fact, in his philosophy, Nietzsche endorses solitary figures. In his book The Will to Power, Nietzsche asks what a great man is. He gives us 3 criteria. The first criterion is that he has the ability to extend his will across great stretches of his life and to despise and reject everything petty about him, including even the fairest, divinest things in the world. This first criterion is not that relevant here. However, the next 2 criteria are quite relevant to our discussion. The second criterion is that he is colder, harder, less hesitating, and without fear of opinion. He lacks the virtues that accompany respect and respectability, and altogether everything that is part of the virtue of the herd. If he cannot lead, he goes alone. As we can see, this criterion tells us that the higher man, like Zarathustra, has a voice of his own and is not afraid to speak out. If the crowd does not listen to him, he does not change his opinions to become more popular or to become a part of the crowd. Rather, he walks alone and makes his own path. The third criterion tells us that he knows he is incommunicable. He finds it tasteless to be familiar, and when one thinks he is, he usually is not. When not speaking to himself, he wears a mask. There is a solitude within him that is inaccessible to praise or blame, his own justice that is beyond appeal. What this criterion tells us is that the Nietzschean higher man is essentially solitary. Therefore, the fact that Zarathustra is alone should be viewed as something positive. Let us read further. Indeed, a nice catch of fish Zarathustra has today. No human being did he catch, but a corpse instead. These words tell us that Zarathustra was so unsuccessful that not only did he not manage to convince anyone in the marketplace, but also he witnessed the death of the only person who listened to him with an open mind. We read, "Uncanny is human existence and still without meaning." This is Zarathustra at his darkest moment. He sees existence as meaningless. But if you have read any existentialist literature before, you should know that the moment when one loses all hope is precisely the moment that one can become free to create one's own meaning. Along with Kierkegaard, Nietzsche was the earliest philosopher to make the meaning of existence and the meaning of life into a philosophical problem. In the next line, Zarathustra says, "I want to teach humans the meaning of their being." Immediately after declaring that human existence is without meaning, he talks about the meaning of being. This is not a contradiction. It may be the case that life is meaningless, but it does not mean that we cannot talk about meaning in general. And so, Zarathustra endeavors to communicate the meaning he has found, but alas, no one listens to him. In this sense, he is alienated and a solitary figure. His situation is similar to Kierkegaard's Knight of Faith who cannot communicate with others. In Kierkegaard's Fear and Trembling we read, "The Knight of Faith is assigned solely to himself. He feels the pain of being unable to make himself understandable to others." Nevertheless, there is one thing that distinguishes Zarathustra from the Knight of Faith. Unlike Zarathustra, the Knight of Faith has no vain desire to instruct others. For Kierkegaard, the true Knight of Faith is a witness, never the teacher, but in Zarathustra's case, we see a desire to communicate. Now, whether communication is possible at all is another matter. The point is, there is a desire to speak of, despite the fact that he knows he is incommunicable. We know he knows this because he says, "I am still far away from them, and I do not make sense to their senses." Then he adds, "I am still a midpoint between a fool and a corpse." When we were analyzing the previous section, I drew your attention to the word midpoint and said whenever we come across the notion of midpoint in Nietzsche's philosophy, we should be aware that something important is happening. The Slovenian philosopher Zupančič sees the midpoint which we mentioned in the previous section as a moment of crisis. If we were to accept her interpretation, we would have to think of Zarathustra as a figure who represents the moment of crisis, the moment which is metaphorically positioned between two situations or two worlds. Let's read on. "The night is dark, the ways of Zarathustra are dark." Remember this line, because in the second part of the book, you will hear Zarathustra tell us that we should not be scared of this darkness. In fact, those who listen to him will find a tender world hidden inside this harsh appearance. Let us conclude with the following words which Zarathustra tells us in the second part of Thus Spoke Zarathustra. "I may well be a wood and a night of dark trees, yet whoever does not shrink from my darkness will also find rose slopes under my cypresses.